emissions of deforestation and forest degradation, which I was having a really hard time saying earlier, because it's a tongue twister and it is something where you're like, what does that even mean?
What does any of it mean? REDD+, UNFCCC, IPCC, COP, 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, etc., etc., etc. Let me break it down. The UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it's an international environmental treaty created to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. In other words, it was created because we burnt too much stuff from below the ground and now we have to save ourselves. So, who leads the UNFCCC? The Conference of the Parties, otherwise known as the COP, is the supreme decision-making body of the UNFCCC. But basically it's a bunch of different countries known as parties. Get it? Because they're parties to the agreement? Yeah, I don't either. Coming together in a conference to talk about climate change and the lack of progress we've made. The most recent COP, COP23, happened in November 2017 in Bonn, Germany. So within the UNFCCC, oh wait, I forgot a C, there are sub-agreements like the Kyoto Protocol, also known as a big failure, and the Paris Agreement, which is the newest approach to save ourselves from the mess we made, and also all anyone talks about at the COPs. At this point in time, it is unclear whether it too will be a big failure. From the UNFCCC, and FAO, UNDP, and UNEP also came reducing emissions of deforestation and forest degradation, commonly known as REDD. And this program became a thing because Costa Rica and Bali were like, deforestation isn't cool, man. But then India and some other countries were like, yeah, well, ignoring conservation, sustainable management of forests, and enhancement of carbon stocks is also not cool. So then at COP19 in Warsaw, Poland, they added the plus to clear things up. So now it's called REDD+, and it aims to halt and reverse forest cover and carbon loss, mostly in developing countries for some reason. Oh, and I should mention that throughout this entire REDD+ thing, countries have been debating whether or how much indigenous people should be involved in the design and implementation of the program. But anyway, we could talk about a bunch of other things too, like nationally determined contributions, responsibilities, and respective frameworks. But what we'll actually be talking about is this, as it was discussed at this.
There are two ways of tackling climate change, and one of them is to cut emissions. We have to cut emissions. We have to stop using fossil fuels. And the other 50% of the climate change solution is addressing the drawdown of greenhouse gas emissions.
Forests are part of the critical land sink that takes out 30% of all emissions that we put up every year. So in fact, for the past 250 years, forests have been providing this critical service. They've taken carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere for as long as we've been putting it into the atmosphere. But I would argue it's more important now than ever, critical in the coming decades, to maintain this forest sink. Because at the rate our energy system is changing, which is just not fast enough, the forest carbon sink is essential.
It's no wonder then that Costa Rica and Bali pushed for the protection of forests. But is REDD+ the answer? What does the program actually do?
What it is in a nutshell is carbon trading, carbon markets. It's a market-based economy so that we can continue to pollute. So, for example, the United States can go ahead and build a new refinery because they can say, I saved X amount of land in the Amazon rainforest. But we have no idea what that means by save the land. A lot of times they'll actually clear cut the forest and they'll plant palm trees, so a monocrop plantation, and they'll say, oh, not only are we being able to save credits, we're also planting trees. But so by buying these credits, then they can pollute X amount of pollution into the atmosphere over in the United States, for example, where I'm from, in North Dakota. And it's dividing and conquering indigenous communities, because in the extraction zone, we're dealing with all the pollution and toxicity and social impacts from the extraction. And then in the communities where these REDD projects are, they're being told, we're going to give you millions of dollars and we're going to save the forest. But instead, when they do these monocrop plantations, and even if they don't, they put up a fence around these areas where they have these sequestered trees so that that the indigenous peoples can no longer go into those areas. They are no longer able to manage their own forests. And a lot of times it pollutes the waterways, it pollutes the rivers, and we lose on both ends of the spectrum.
Nosso país, nós temos uma grande dificuldade, até mesmo de diálogo com o nosso governo, por conta dessa evolução da economia, que traz hoje para nós tantas pessoas falando de sustentabilidade. O que é sustentabilidade quando a gente vê hoje um país num fracasso de desmatamento, de destruição da nossa mãe natureza, da mãe terra?
One of the issues with REDD Plus is that it really started out as this market-based mechanism idea, with the idea of a giant global carbon market that was going to, compensate developing countries for conserving forests. But in the end, that carbon market never materialized, and probably, who knows if it would. And there's some, the aviation industry may offset carbon and use forests in that way, but that's not what REDD Plus has evolved to be over time.
There's been a lot of issues with land grabs. There's been a lot of issues with people losing their lands. There's been a lot of issues with governments using REDD as an excuse to push indigenous populations off their land. So it's such a complex issue, it's sort of difficult to go into it.
Menurut saya REDD Plus itu ya agenda yang gagal untuk sebuah skema untuk perubahan iklim, karena banyak hal yang memang terjadi di mana lokasi-lokasi tempat REDD Plus itu banyak menimbulkan menyingkirkan masyarakat lokal, banyak terjadi kekerasan, sehingga itu juga tidak mengakomodir agenda, tidak mengakomodir keinginan-keinginan masyarakat, sehingga REDD Plus menjadi bagian dari.
But the objective of reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, I'm not really sure who could be against that. But I think very importantly, how that's done is really important. I mean, our local rights being respected, our local livelihoods being enhanced or inhibited. Our local people really participating in the implementation of these initiatives. I think we have a long way to go in really understanding and supporting that, and it's very understandable why local communities and other groups are still worried about what REDD Plus could be.
So what can REDD Plus be or not be?
Land is belong to the government. Even if you refuse the REDD, they're going to implement it. So what we said, okay, fine, let us implement it, but implement it by a full and effective participation of indigenous peoples. So we put in the process, it have to be the FP, the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples. So each country who is driving the regions of REDD Plus, it needs to be participatory. Then the implementation need to be access and benefit sharing. It's not happening always. It can be changed if they took it in order to implement Paris Agreement, because we have the preambles of the Paris Agreement, who call the countries for them obligation to respect the human right and right of indigenous peoples. And that maybe can help.
Yang lebih penting memang harus semua apapun agenda lingkungan dunia harus melibatkan masyarakat adat, masyarakat lokal, karena mereka yang lebih paham dan lebih bijak untuk mengelola alam di bumi ini.
I think over the last 10 years we've seen an interesting convergence between the agendas of indigenous rights and the forest protection agenda, as the increasing awareness of the degree to which indigenous peoples are proven best stewards of the forest.
Es de conocimiento de todo, incluso no en informes oficiales, que los pueblos indígenas son los que mejor conservan los bosques en Latinoamérica y en el mundo.
More than 1/5 of the carbon stored in the world tropical forest lies in indigenous territories. Did I say this? No, scientists did.
Se querem mesmo salvar a natureza, salvar o planeta, é preciso primeiro conversar com quem já está protegendo os territórios.
So we are asking now to have a mechanism of full and effective participation of indigenous peoples to be here for the decision making and to be support for implementation. So we ask for the capacity building of us, but how we can also build the capacity of the state. Because we have these knowledges. Of course, it's not written like PhD or master of things, but we have that. How it can be in the same level of recognition objectively as science knowledge. And then from this, we start implementing it.
Quero aqui fazer canto de agradecimento para que esses espíritos possam se despertar de todas essas energias que estão aí nos perturbando na Terra.